Hey, hello friends, and welcome to Retro Portal Studio, and in this video we're going to be taking a look at creating this customized range selector. With this video you're going to learn the fundamentals to create your own customized range selectors or progress indicators in Flutter. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so right now I'm in a simple Flutter app in which I just have this my home page, and this my home page is a stateful widget. In the build function of the stateful widget, I'm returning a scaffold which has a center for its body. So to create the customized range selector, the first thing that I'll do is I'll come up to the lib folder, and in here I'll create a new file and I'll name this Custom Range Selector. We're going to build the range selector as a separate widget so that we can use it in whatever project we want. In this file, I'll create a new stateful widget and I'll name this Custom Range Selector, and I'll add an import for the material.dart file. Now, let's create a list of arguments that this custom range selector is going to take. For this, I'll come up in the stateful widget, and the first thing that this custom range selector is going to take is the start and the end point. These values are going to be of type double. Along with this, we're also going to pass it the number of divisions, the onStart change and onEnd change function, which will be called whenever the start or the end value of the range selector changes. And other than these, we're also going to give the custom range selector a value of width and height. To create a constructor, I'm going to click on any of these arguments and press Alt-Enter in Android Studio, and you can see that we have the option to create constructor for final fields. I'm going to click on this and you can see that we have the custom range selector constructor which takes in all these arguments. Now, I'm going to go back to the main.dart file and I'll come down to the build function of my home page. In the build function, I'll create a new size variable which is going to be equal to mediaQuery.offContext.size. We're going to use this size to create the width and height for the range selector. So I'll create a new double and I'll name this rsWidth, and I'll put it equal to size.width into 0.75. That is equal to 75% of the width of the screen. Now, for the height of the selector, I'll create a new double and I'll name this rsHeight, and I'll put it equal to rsWidth into 0.25. That means the height of the selector is going to be 25% of the width of the selector. Next, I'll come to the scaffold and I'll add the property of background color. For this, I'll give it the color of colors.blueAccent. At this point, I'll bring up the emulator and run the app. Right now you can see that for the app, we only have the blue color of the scaffold. Now, I'm going to come to the center widget, and in the child of the center, I'm going to add the custom range selector that we just created. For the arguments of this range selector, we need to pass in the width, that is going to be rsWidth. We'll also pass in the height, and for this range selector, I'm going to keep the number of divisions to 10. Along with this, we also need to pass in the value of start and end. Right now, we don't have any start value in my home page, so what I'll do is I'll come up to the state of my home page, and here I'll create a new double, and I'll name this start. So just for demonstration, I'm going to give start a value of 0.25, and in the same way, I'll also create a new double, and I'll name this end and put it equal to 0.75. With this, the start handle of the range selector will start at 25% and the end handle will start at 75% width of the range selector. So I'll come down to the custom range selector, and here I'll pass in the value of start and end. Along with these, we also need to pass in the value for the function of onStart change. As you can see in the custom range selector, the function needs to give us the value of start, and the onEnd change function gives us the value of end. So in the main.dart, for the onStart change, I'll give it a function which takes in a value of start, and with this new value, I'll set the state, and here I'll set the value of start to value. In the same way, I'll create onEnd change, and I'll give it an identical function. Here I'll pass in the value, and in the body of this function, I'll do setState, and I'll set the new value of end to value. At this point, if I run the app, you can see that there's absolutely no change because we have not done anything yet in the custom range selector. So let's move to the range selector file and create our customized selector. So the first thing that I'll do here is to add a background to the range selector. For this, I'll come up to the build function and in the container. And to this container, I'll give it the value of width, and the value of this width is going to be the width that is passed to the custom range selector. So I'll use widget.width. In the same way, I'll pass in the height. That is going to be widget.height. And now for the child of this container, I'm going to add a stack. We need a stack here because all the elements of the range selector needs to be organized along the z-axis. So for the stack, I'll pass in the children property, And for the first child of the stack, I'll add a container. The reason I'm adding a container here is to give some background for the range selector. So before moving any further, let me show you a diagram to explain to you what we're trying to achieve here. This is the representation of the range selector that we're trying to create. The first thing that we will do is add a background to the range selector to separate this from our other UI elements. After that, we need to add these markers to the top and bottom to show different range points of the selector. Once this is done, we'll add these indicators that you can see in the red color to show the starting position and the end position. Once this is done, we'll add the control handles to manipulate the range of the range selector. On the right hand side of the diagram, you can see that I've divided the height into two parts. The first height is 75% of the total height of the selector, and this is going to show the range scale. The bottom 25% of the height is only to show the handles that we're going to use to manipulate the range. In this range selector, you can see that we have 10 divisions here, and if the divisions are 10, the number of dividers are going to be 9. That is one less than the number of divisions. We'll come back to this diagram, but first, let's add the background to the range selector. So we have added the container for the first child of the stack, and for this, we need to pass in the height. This container is going to represent the range stripe, and the height of this container, like I showed you in the diagram, is going to be 75% of the height of the selector. To create all these default values, I'll come up to the state, and here I'll create a new double, and I'll name this bar height. And initially, I'll set it equal to 0. Now, I'll create the init state function, and in the init state, I'll set the new value of bar height, and I'll put it equal to widget.height into 0.75. That means 75% of the height that is given for the selector. So I'll come down to the container and give it the height of bar height. Now, I'll add a decoration to this container, and here I'll pass in box decoration. For the background color of the range stripe, I'll add colors.white, and I'll also set the border radius and put it equal to border radius.circular and give it the radius of 8.0 for all the sides. At this point, if I run the app and bring back the emulator, you can see that we have the background color of white for the range stripe with rounded corners. Next thing that we need to do is we need to add the markers to different range points in the range stripe. For this, I'll add the child to this container, and for the child, I'll pass in the stack. The reason I'm adding a stack here to the container is to keep the background separate from the rest of the UI of the selector. So for this stack, I'll add in the children property, and in here we need to add in the markers. Now since the markers are not going to change once the widget is rendered initially, so we can create the list of markers in the init state function and then use that list in the build function. So for this, what I'll do is in the state, I'll create a new list, and this is going to be a list of widget, and I'll name this top dividers, and I'll put it equal to an empty list. I'll also create bottom dividers, and I'll also put it equal to an empty list. Now I'll come to the init state, and here I'll create a list of marker positions which will help us display the markers at particular positions in the range scale. For this, I'll create a list, and I'll name this markers. For now, I'll minimize the emulator, and for this markers, I'll use the constructor of list called generate. In this generate function, you can see that we have to pass in the length of the list that we're trying to create, and along with this, we also have to pass in a generator function. And this function takes in an argument of index, and for that particular index, we have to return the value. So let's go to the diagram and see what we're going to pass in as the length and how we're going to create the values. So in the diagram, you can see that in the top here, we have the formula for creating the divider positions or marker positions. In this, first we have to calculate the distance between two markers, and then to calculate the position of that marker, we can use this formula to multiply the distance between the markers with the value of index plus 1. We need to add this plus 1 here because for the 0th index of the list, the marker position is going to be the distance between the markers. For the first index, the position is going to be twice the distance between the markers. For second index, it's going to be 3 times the distance between markers, and so on. So keeping this formula in mind, we'll go back to the code, and the first thing that we'll do here is calculate the distance between the markers. For this, I'll create a new double and name this marker distance, and I'll put this equal to widget.width, and I'll divide this by the total number of divisions, that is widget.divisions. With this, we get the distance between the two markers, and now for the length of the list, we need to pass in widget.divisions minus 1, because the length of the dividers or the markers is going to be 1 less than the total number of divisions. If the divisions are 10, the markers are going to be 9. Now for the generator function, we get the value of index in the arguments, and for the position value of the marker in the list, we can calculate this as marker distance multiplied by index plus 1. With this, we get the list of distance for markers which we can use to plot markers on the range selector. Now, I'll set the new value of top dividers, and I'll put this equal to markers.map, and I'll rename the argument to MP, that is for marker position. And in this, I'm going to return a positioned widget. I'm going to use positioned here because we're going to add the markers to the stack, and with the positioned widget, we can add markers at particular positions. If you need to learn more about stack and positioned, you can check out the tutorial with the link in the description below. For the positions, I'll set the top and put it equal to 0 because at this point we're creating top dividers, and I'll set the left value to MP. For the child of this positions, I'll add a container, and for the container, I'm going to set the color property, and I'll set it equal to colors.black. I'll set the height of this container to 10, and I'll set the width to 2. And because we have set the width to 2, we need to adjust the left position of the marker. The reason for this is because the positioned is going to start at the left of the container, and because the width of the container is 2, the marker is not going to be at the center. To create the marker at the center of that position, we need to set the value of left to MP minus 1. This 1 is equal to half the width of the container. And now, since we're using a map function, we need to use the toList function to convert this to a list. At this point, we have the top dividers ready. So what I'll do is I'll come down to the build function, and in the stack what I'll do is I'll use the spread operator, and I'll use the top dividers. I'll bring back the emulator and run the app once again. At this point, you can see that in the range scale, we have the markers for the top end. I'll come back to the init state function, and in here, I'll set the value of bottom dividers. And again, I'll put it equal to the same value as that of top dividers. And the only change that we need to make here is we need to set the top to bottom. I'll come back to the build function, and in the stack, just like top dividers, I'll add bottom dividers. You can see that we have the top and bottom markers to represent different range points in the range selector. Now that we have the markers ready, the next thing that we need to do is we need to add the start and end indicator for the selected range. For this, I'll come up to the state, and in here, I'll create a new double, and I'll name this start position, and put it equal to 0. I'll also create the end position, and also give it the initial value of 0. Now, since in the main.dart file, we're giving the initial value of start and end and passing it to custom range selector, we need to set the initial values for start and end point in the init state function. For this, I'll come up in the init state, and here I'll set the value of start position and put it equal to widget.start and multiply that by the width of the widget. The reason for this is because the start is the percentage value that is between 0 and 1. And we need to multiply that with the width of the widget to get the actual value of start position. In the same way, we're going to set the value of end position, and we're going to put it equal to widget.end multiplied by widget.width. Now that we have the start and end position, let's take a look at adding the indicators. For this, I'll come down to the builds function, and after this container, I'll add a positioned widget, and in this, I'll set the child to a container. I'll set the width of this container to 2. That is equal to the width of the markers, and I'll set its height to bar height, that is the height of the range scale. Along with this, I'll set the color of this container to colors.red. Now, for the position value, I'll set the top to 0, and I'll set the left to start position -1. This -1 is once again to adjust the center of this indicator. In the same way, we can copy this positioned widget and use it for the end position. So instead of the start position, I'll set it to end position. And at this point, if I run the app, you can see that we have the indicators for the start and end position on the range scale. The start position is set to 25% of the total width, and the end position is set to 75% of the total width. And these values are coming from the main.dart file, in which we set the start and end initial value to 0.25 and 0.75 respectively. Now we have the start and end indicators ready. The next thing that we need to do is we need to add the controllers to control the start and end range. For this, I'll create a new positioned widget in the end, and in this, I'll add the child of container. For this container, I'll set the value of width to 20, and I'll set the value of height to widget.height minus bar height, which gives it the remaining height of the complete widget. Next, I'll also give a color to the container. I'll set it to colors.red. Now, I need to give this container a position. And for the position, I'll set the bottom to 0 and I'll set the left value to start position -10. And this 10 is half the width of the container. At this point, if I save the app, you can see that we now have the controller handle directly below the start indicator. Now to manipulate the value of start position, what we need to do is we need to wrap this container, that is the control handle, with a gesture detector. And in the gesture detector, to detect the drag, we can use the function of onPanUpdate. And this onPanUpdate gives us with a pan update detail, from which we can get the distance traveled by the user drag. We have to calculate the new value of start position. So I'll create a new double, and I'll name this new position. I'll minimize the emulator, and to set the value of this new position, I'm going to use start position, and to the start position we need to add the distance by which the user has dragged the pointer. For this we can use panupdate.delta.dx. With this panupdate.delta.dx we get the distance traveled along the x-axis, and this can be negative or positive. One more thing that we have to keep in mind is we have to keep the value of new position between 0.0 and the total width of the widget. For this, I'll wrap this value with brackets, and I'll use the clamp function to keep the value between 0.0 and the upper value of widget.width. One thing we have to keep in mind is to update the value only if the new value is less than the end value. For this, I'll add an if condition, and in this I'll check if the new value is less than or equal to end position -10. I have added this -10 to make sure that the start position and end position don't overlap. In the body of this if block, I'm going to use the setState function, and in this I'll set the new start position and put it equal to new position. One more thing that we have to do is in the if block we have to use widget.onStartChange, and we have to pass it the value of new position. At this point, if I run the app and go back to the emulator, you can see that now I can move the control handle and it controls the start position of the range. To do the same thing for the end range, I can copy this positioned widget and use it for the end value. In this case, we need to change the start position to end position. For the left value of positioned, we also need to change this in the new position calculation. And in the if block, we need to check if the new position is greater than or equal to start position plus 10. We also need to change the widget.onStartChange to onEndChange, and in the setState we need to change the start position to end position. At this point, if I run the app, you can see that we now have the control handle for the end value also, and I can use that to manipulate the end range. I'll reformat the code, and one more thing that we can do is we can use the onEndChange and onStartChange function to display the values on the main screen. For this, I'll go to the main.dart, and in the builds function of my home page, I'll wrap the custom range selector with a column. With this, the custom range selector becomes the first child of the column, and for the second child of the column, I'll add a simple text, and in this, I'll display the start and end values like this. I'll set the style of text so that the color of the text is white, and I'll also add some space between the range selector and the text by using the sized box widget and giving it a height of 20. At this point, if I run the app, you can see that the range selector and the text moves to the top of the screen. For this, I can come up to the column, and here I can add the main axis alignment and set it to main axis alignment.center. I'll save the app, and you can see that now if I change the values, the value of start and the end change. But there is one problem. You can see that the values are no longer mapped between 0 and 1. And this is because we have made a small mistake in the custom range selector. For this, I'll go back to the file, and in the widget.onStartChange function, we cannot directly send the value of new position. We have to divide this value by the widget.width to get the value mapped between 0 and 1. And to change the precision of the double, we can wrap this in the bracket, and we can use toString as fixed. And in this, I'll set the value of fraction digits to 2. But there is one more problem. At this point, the value is now converted to a string. So what we can do is we can take this value, and you can use double.parse, and in this we can pass this value, and this will convert it back to a double. We can do the same thing for the end value, and I'll set this in the widget.onEndChanged. I'll run the app once again and bring back the emulator. And now if I move the controllers, you can see that the new value of start and end is mapped between 0 and 1, and now the values are set to have a precision of 2. But there is one more thing that we can do. We can change the color of the selected area to give a better user experience. For this, I need to add another positioned widget, and for the child, I'll give it a container. And this time for the width of the container, we can set the value to end position minus start position. And this will set the width of the container to the width of the selected area. I'll set the height of the container to bar height to match the height of the range bar. And for the color, you can set any value, but I'll set the value of colors.deeporange.widthAlpha for some transparency, and I'll set it to 100. At this point, if I save the app, you can see that the container starts from the beginning of the range. For this, we have to pass in the position, and for the left position, we have to pass in the start position, so that the new colored container always starts at the start position of the range. We can also set the top to 0. At this point, if I save the app, you can see that the selected range is displayed with a different color. And with this, you have a fully functional customized range selector in Flutter. You can use this knowledge to even create linear progress indicators in Flutter also. I hope you find this video useful, and if you do, please make sure to hit the like and subscribe button, and also consider supporting me via the links in the description below. See you next time. Peace.